Hello, everyone. This is YouTube Radio, made for your ears. Today's story on YURA YouTube Radio is about Eom Heung-do. He may not be among the 100 great figures who brought glory to Korea, but as a special bonus episode, we have a man from the Joseon dynasty, Eom Heung-do, whose life is deeply tied to the tragic King Danjong, here to tell you his own story. I am Eom Heung-do. Chapter 1. Born in the land of Yongwol. I was born in Yongwol, Gangwon Province. It was a land encircled by layer upon layer of mountains, carved through by the winding Dong River, a quiet, remote place, far removed from the bustle of Hanyang. Yet I loved that land. The people were as simple and rugged as the harsh mountain terrain, and their hearts were as clear as the clean river water. My family had served for generations as Hojang local magistrate of the Yongwol area. A Hojang was not a court official drawing the king's salary, but it was no light position either. We were responsible for the day-to-day lives of the people of our county. My father always said, "It doesn't matter how high a man's rank is or how low. What matters is holding fast to what is right in the place you have been given. That is a person's duty." I grew up with those words carved into my heart. As a boy, I roamed the mountains and rivers of Yongwol, freely catching fish along the Dong River, gathering wood on the slopes of Taehwa Mountain, picking up scraps of wisdom from the village elders. In those days, I had no idea the world could be so cruel, nor that loyalty and righteousness could become so heavy a burden to carry. I simply thought I would live out an ordinary, modest life and grow old in the same ordinary way. Chapter 2. A king's child comes to Yongwol. The world turned upside down starting from the year of the ox, 1453. Word came down from Hanyang that Grand Prince Su Yang had killed the regent ministers Hwang Bo, In and Kim Jong-seo, the men appointed to protect the young king, and seized power for himself. It was called the Gyeyu Purge, the rectification of disorder. The name sounded noble, but in truth it was a coup stained with the blood of loyal men who had stood at a child's side. King Danjong was still so young. He was barely 12 years old when he ascended the throne. Having lost his mother at birth and his father, King Munjong, after a reign of only 2 years, he came to the throne an orphan, before he was old enough to understand what that even meant, and into the space beside that lonely boy stepped the enormous ambition of his uncle, Grand Prince Su Yang. In the first year of Danjong's reign, 1455, the king was forced to abdicate in favor of his uncle. The man who became King Sejo elevated his young nephew to the title of Sangwang, upper king, only to soon demote him further to Nosangun, a mere lord. And then in 1457 he was sent here, to Yongwol, to exile. I heard the news in Yongwol. A young king was coming to this distant mountain county as a prisoner. His lodgings were to be prepared at a place called Cheongnyongpo. Cheongnyongpo, a sliver of land where the river bends so sharply on 3 sides that it becomes a natural island with a sheer cliff face on the 4th. A prison fashioned by nature itself. When I heard those words, something pricked at my chest. An odd mixture of dread and sorrow. Chapter 3. The face I saw across the water. I will never forget the day King Danjong arrived in Yongwol. The sky that day was unusually high and clear, yet somehow that very clarity made me sad. The king, who had traveled hundreds of li from Hanyang, was pale, his gaze distant and elsewhere. My duties as Hojang brought me in and out of the area around Cheongnyongpo. At first it was purely official business, but gradually the king's circumstances began to weigh on me. In summer, the waters rose and cut the place off like an island in winter. The wind howled through and chilled one to the bone. In that narrow strip of land, the exiled king lived with only a handful of attendants. Once from the far bank, I caught a distant glimpse of the king. He was sitting alone beneath a pine tree, doing something with his hands. I was told later that he was composing poetry. There is a sejo that has come down to us from those days, 10,000 leagues from home. I parted from my love, where now shall I set my wandering heart? I sit beside a stream, and even the water, it seems, weeps as it flows through the dark night. The first time I heard those words, I had to hold back tears. The king was lonely. He had been stripped of his throne, his loyal ministers had scattered or been killed, and now he was confined to a tiny strip of land surrounded by the river. As Hojang, I watched over the area around his quarters and tried to ease whatever discomforts I could. That was the most I was capable of doing then. Chapter 4. The world shifts, and death draws near. That autumn, news arrived from Hanyang of yet another storm of blood. Seong Sammun, Park Paengnon, Hawiji, Igae, Ryu Seong-won, Yu-eung-bu, the men who would come to be called the Six Martyrs, had been discovered in a plot to restore King Danjong to his throne, and were put to death by the cruelest methods the law permitted. The news plunged all of Yongwol into a heavy silence. People exchanged glances but sealed their mouths. To be branded with any connection to treason was to invite the annihilation of one's entire family line. I too kept my silence, but inside me something was burning. The poem Seong Sam-mun reportedly left as he walked to his death, spread quietly among the people. When this body dies, what shall it become? On the highest peak of Bongne Mountain, I shall become a great standing pine, and when white snow covers all the earth, I alone shall remain evergreen. I recited those words to myself alone in the night, and struggled to hold back tears. King Sejo tightened his grip on Danjong even further. He stripped him of even the title of Nosangun, and reduced him to the status of a commoner. The surveillance around him grew harsher. The handful of people who had still dared come and go near. The king's quarters dwindled away one by one. The fear of being accused of treason for associating with the former king came to rule everything in Yongwol. Chapter 5. That night, the king passed. The 24th day of the 10th lunar month, 1457. I will never forget that day. I will never forget it even in death. Word first spread that a Gumbu Dosa, a royal officer charged with carrying out the king's commands, named Wang Bangyon, had arrived in Yongwol. A Gumbu Dosa's arrival meant that some disposition had been handed down concerning the king. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. I too sensed with every instinct I had that something terrible was unfolding. Late that night, the news came. King Danjong had passed away. The official account said he had taken his own life. Whether that was truly a voluntary death, or whether poison had been administered from above, or whether he had been killed by some other means, no one stated it plainly. Perhaps no one could bring themselves to. Only the bare fact remained on that night. A 17-year-old boy had gone cold and still. I sat for a long time after I heard. 17, younger than my own children. A boy who had entered the world without his mother, who had been robbed of his father, robbed of his kingdom, and now had been driven to death, alone in a cold mountain valley in Gangwon province, without a single person close enough to hold his hand at the end. I did not sleep that night, and by the gray light before dawn, a resolve had hardened inside me. Chapter 6. No one would touch him. When news of the king's death spread, the entire county of Yongwol was seized by terror. No one would go near the body. You must understand what fear looked like in those days, to touch the remains of a man who had died. Condemned as a traitor, to show him respect, to mourn him, to bury him, in a way that implied he deserved it, was to risk becoming the next target yourself. The doom could extend to your sons and your grandsons. People walked past, eyes averted. The body lay where it had been left. By the second day, still no one had moved. I went to my wife. "Will you be all right?" I asked her. "If something happens to me?" She looked at me for a long moment, then said, "If what you're about to do is the right thing, what is there for me to say? Only be careful." Her eyes were full of tears as she said it. That image of her face stays with me still. I gathered my sons and told them what I intended to do. I told them the risk. I told them they too might suffer for it. My eldest son replied in a trembling voice, "Father, if you say it is right, we will follow you." Tears nearly rose to my eyes. I swallowed them down. There was still work to do. Chapter 7, I buried a king. I moved under cover of night, alone with a single torch. I will not describe everything I found. Some things belong only to the one who was there. I will say this, he looked small. Even in death, he seemed like a boy who had never quite grown into the crown they had placed on his head. I knelt and clasped my hands together, bowing my head for a long moment. "Your Majesty, I am Eom Heung-do, Hojang of Yongwol. Forgive the lateness of my arrival. I have come to take you somewhere fitting." I had known a certain hillside since boyhood, a place called Donggoljisan, which the old people of the county spoke of as having good earth, a place where the soil settled well and the trees grew straight. I carried the king there. It was not a proper royal burial. There was no lacquered coffin, no ritual objects, no ministers in their court robes. I had a torch, a spade, and my 2 bare hands. I built the burial mound myself and planted a young tree beside it. Before the mound, I prostrated myself and stayed there for a long time. Tears came the first time in my life I had wept so long and so deeply. "Your Majesty, this is all I could give you. Forgive me, forgive me." I pressed my forehead to the cold earth and prayed. Chapter 8. Prepared to face the consequences. When daylight came, I gathered my wife and sons and spoke to them. "When word of what I have done gets out, our family will face grave consequences. Are you truly prepared for that?" My wife nodded in silence. My son said nothing either. I went to the county office myself and told them what I had done. I could have kept quiet. Perhaps no one would have known. Perhaps I could have buried the secret along with the king, but I did not hide it. I had not done a shameful thing, and I would not pretend otherwise. I told them plainly and walked away standing straight. The report was sent up to Hanyang. I waited for the judgment that would end my life or destroy everything I had built. It did not come. Sejo did not punish me for reasons I never fully understood. Perhaps his own conscience intervened at the last. Perhaps making an example of an old county. Hojang for burying an exiled boy was more trouble than it was worth. Perhaps even the most ruthless of men have a boundary. They will not cross in full daylight. But I did not feel safe. I took my family and withdrew from Yongwol, retreating deeper into the mountains away from any gaze that might one day decide to find us. And there we lived. Chapter 9. Years hidden in the mountains. Life in the mountains was hard. But I found I did not mind the hardship. There was a certain cleanness to it. You knew what you needed, you worked for it, and you slept. No politics. No ledger-keeping of power. From time to time, I would face toward Yongwol, toward that hillside, and bow, just to let him know that someone still remembered. The world went on. King Sejo proved himself a capable ruler. He reorganized the law codes, expanded the military, strengthened the state. History must acknowledge his abilities. I acknowledge them. But history must also remember what those abilities were built upon. Every palace has a foundation. Sejo's was the body of a 17-year-old boy, lying in a cold river valley in Gangwon province. My wife passed away before me. The mountain winters wore her body down before its time. As she lay unable to rise, I sat beside her and held her hand. "Without you," I told her, "I could not have done what I did. It was because of you." She gave me a faint smile and shook her head. "It was because you were a good person," she said. Those were her last words. Chapter 10. King Sukjong restores his name. I did not live to see it. But in 1698, 240 years after that night in Yongwol, King Sukjong issued a decree. King Danjong was posthumously restored to his royal title. The name Nosangun was revoked, and the posthumous title Danjong was conferred. And the modest mound I had built with my own hands was elevated to Jangnung, an official royal tomb. In that same process, I, Eom Heung-do, was posthumously awarded the rank of Minister of Works, a senior second-grade official. In life, I had been nothing more than a county hojang. In death, I was given the title of a high court minister. When I first heard of it, I could find no words. Not because of the rank is just paper and ink, but because the nation had looked back and said, yes, that was right. That the act I had performed was not treason, but loyalty, not desecration, but devotion. That recognition reached somewhere inside me. I had not known was still waiting to be reached. Later, under King Yeongjo, a commemorative stele was erected, and a shrine called Changjolsa, the Shrine of Manifested Integrity, was built near Jangnung. My memorial tablet was placed there alongside those of the 6 martyrs, among those who had given their lives, or kept their faith for King Danjong. I am in very good company. Chapter 11. What I believe about loyalty. I do not think of the character Chung, loyalty, as something grand or sweeping. Loyalty is not only the great act of laying down one's life for one's king. It is this when something wrong is unfolding before your eyes, and you feel the fear rising in you to overcome that fear and take one step forward. That is loyalty. That is righteousness. That is what it means to be fully human. I believe it with all that I am. People ask, were you not afraid? I was. My hands trembled. I thought of my sons. I thought of my wife. But there is something more frightening than fear, and that is the specific coldness of having done nothing when something needed to be done. I have watched that cold settle into men and hollow them out. They go on breathing and eating, but something essential has departed and never returns. I was more afraid of that hollowness than of any punishment. Sejo could have ordered. When the fear came, I did not run. When the shame came, I did not look away. When the right thing stood before me and asked, why must it be you? I did not answer that question. I simply moved forward. Chapter 12. What the land remembers. I was born in a small county, and I aged and died in that small county. I had no ambition to leave my name in history, no grand vision of changing the world. But fate demanded of me a single choice: look away or step forward. I stepped forward. And that choice brought me here to a place where, centuries later, people still speak my name. Not because I was remarkable, but because in that one moment, I did what a human being was supposed to do. History is written first by kings and heroes. But what holds history together is the small decisions of small people, anonymous people in the dark. When no one is watching, doing what they believe is right. Those moments accumulated become history. King Danjong, he ascended the throne at 12 and died at 17. A short and sorrowful life. Yet his name was not erased, because there were people who remembered him, some, like Seong Moon, who gave their lives without flinching, and some, like me, who simply recovered one body from the cold. I, Eom Heung-do, have no regrets, not while I lived and not in death. No regrets for that night when I took one step forward through my fear. No regrets for that dawn when I dug the cold earth with my bare hands and made a king's grave. On that night, I believe I became for the first time a complete human being. Epilogue at Yangneung. The Dong River still flows through Yongwol today. The same river the young king watched from Cheongnyongpo. The same water. Seasons pass, people vanish, dynasties rise and fall, and history is written again, but the river runs on. I closed out my life listening to the sound of that river. That is enough. That is more than enough. To those who will someday face their own dark river, do not wait for daylight. Do not wait for someone braver to go first. Pick up the torch. Walk forward. That single step will, in time, make you who you truly are. Eom Heung-do, Hojang of Yongwol.